"Hey, old man, that piano's dead, just like you." That's what they shouted when he touched the broken keys in the middle of a crowded train station. But what happened next? It left everyone in tears. No one knew the stranger was an undercover billionaire, and the song he played hadn't been heard in decades. What began as mockery turned into awe as his haunting melody unearthed a forgotten love story, inspired a generation of children, and healed a broken world, one trembling note at a time. Now, before we dive deeper, please like and subscribe to our channel. We share powerful, meaningful stories like this every day. And drop a comment below to let us know what time and where you're watching from. Thank you so much. And now, let's get back to the story. "Hey, old man, that piano's dead, just like your fashion sense." The boy's voice sliced through the murmur of the afternoon crowd. He was no older than 17, wearing headphones around his neck like a badge of relevance, leaning back against a concrete pillar with the lazy arrogance only youth could afford. The man he addressed didn't even flinch. He stood about 10 feet away, motionless, gazing at the piano nestled near the far end of the downtown station, a weathered upright tucked between a crumbling vending machine and a forgotten pillar coated in grime and gum. Its wood was chipped, varnish long since faded to a ghostly amber. Most people had forgotten it existed, but not him. He stepped forward. His shoes, once Italian leather, were cracked from time. His long beige coat looked expensive, in the way that a forgotten painting still held its value to the right pair of eyes. A fedora shaded most of his face, but a slight silver beard peeked beneath his jawline, trimmed but not groomed, like everything about him was once precise and had slowly unraveled. No one recognized him, and yet the space seemed to bend around his quiet presence, not with fear, not with fame, but with history. The man knelt slightly and touched the first key. Nothing. The key stuck. A soft wheeze escaped the piano's belly, like the ghost of a breath not ready to return. The boy laughed. "Told you, it's just junk." A few other heads turned, some with curiosity, others with that dull, habitual cynicism city dwellers wore like armor. People moved quickly here. No one lingered unless they had nowhere else to be. But the man lingered. He pressed another key, slightly more pressure. This time, a sound emerged. Weak, hollow, but real. He nodded as if acknowledging an old friend. Then, without asking permission or offering apology, he sat down on the rickety bench. A mother dragging a stroller cast a quick glance as she passed. A vendor shook his head. Someone muttered, "Here we go again." The man took a breath, then spoke, not to anyone in particular, just into the air as if to someone long gone. "Anyone remember the Last Waltz of Elara?" No one answered. He didn't expect they would. A silence passed through the station. Trains came and went. The sounds of heels on tile, rolling suitcases, announcements overhead. Life churned on. Then a whisper, soft, from an elderly woman seated on a wooden bench nearby. "Elara?" she repeated, voice barely audible. Her hands clutched the edges of a well-worn book on her lap. Her eyes narrowed as if trying to pull something from deep inside her memory. The man nodded, almost imperceptibly, and turned back to the piano. He raised his hands, elegant hands, with long, slightly crooked fingers, the kind that had once played every note in the world as if it were written for him. And then he paused. A long pause. So long, people began to murmur again. The boy scoffed under his breath. The security guard 2 pillars down radioed in, asking whether someone should escort the loiterer out. But before any decision could be made, he played. The first note was fractured, a thin, brittle A. It wobbled in the air, uncertain of itself, unsure whether it belonged. He pressed a second note, then a third. They were broken, wounded, like fragments of a lullaby sung through tears. But then something happened. He adjusted, adapted, played around the broken keys, slid his hand in a way that made the damage feel intentional. Like imperfections in old vinyl, the hiss and crackle that makes it human. The boy took off his headphones. The mother pushing the stroller slowed to a stop. Even the security guard, hand still on his radio, held his breath. The man leaned into the melody, letting it unfold like something he hadn't touched in years but still lived inside his bones. The sound was unlike anything they'd heard. Not technically perfect, far from it. But there was an aching familiarity to it, as if the notes remembered being loved. The music rose slowly, a trembling waltz, steeped in longing, memory, regret, and something else too, something fragile and hopeful. like forgiveness whispered in the dark. Somewhere in the station, a phone rang. It went unanswered. A man in a suit halted mid-call, lowering his phone as the melody caught him mid-stride. A teenage girl recording a TikTok turned her phone camera toward the piano, but slowly lowered it again. It didn't feel right to interrupt. The man's shoulders moved with the rhythm now, his head slightly tilted, eyes closed, and the piano, this abused, neglected old thing, began to weep. You could feel it. Not a single note was clean, yet the music carried. It cut through the city noise like smoke under a door. It reminded people of things they didn't know they'd forgotten. The boy who mocked him earlier now sat on the edge of the pillar, feet dangling, lips slightly parted. The man finished the first refrain. He paused again. Then, very softly, he whispered. Again, not to the crowd, but maybe to the piano, or someone it once sang for. She asked me to write her a song, but I could never finish it, until now. The woman with the worn book gasped aloud. She rose slowly, her eyes were wet. Elara, she said. The crowd was growing now. Dozens stopped mid-commute. Trains came and went, unnoticed. Even the pigeons paused their lazy circles overhead. The man began again, more confident this time. The second refrain filled the terminal with a deeper melody. It felt like being held, like the exact moment you realize someone forgives you. No one knew what the song was called, but no one doubted it was real. A little girl whispered to her mother, "It sounds like dreams." And somewhere just beyond the moment, beyond the crowd and chaos and doubt, a door inside every listener opened. The boy stepped down from his perch. He didn't say anything, just stood near the piano, watching, humbled. The man never looked up. His hands told the story of loss, of something buried, of decades wrapped in silence, of a promise made too late, yet fulfilled all the same. And as he reached the final chord, a suspended D that hung in the air longer than it should have, the room waited, watched, willed it not to end, but it did. He lifted his hands. The station stood still. Then a single clap from the woman, then another. Then the crowd joined, not in raucous applause, but in something softer, reverent, like the aftermath of prayer. The man stood. Gently he touched the piano once more, this time with affection. And then, wordlessly, he turned away. You can't just walk away like that. The voice was soft, too soft to be a demand, yet too full of trembling urgency to be a request. He stopped mid-step. The clapping had faded, the echoes still lingered. But the voice that spoke those words didn't belong to admiration or awe. It belonged to history catching up to him. Slowly, the man turned. The elderly woman stood not 5 steps from where he played. Her hands still clutched the weathered book against her chest, but her knuckles were white now, her jaw tight. And in her eyes ringed with age and stormed with unspoken years, there was disbelief, and something dangerously close to grief. "It is you," she whispered. He blinked once, and you could almost see the fight inside him, the desperate urge to deny what her eyes had already confirmed. But he didn't run, not this time. "Lena," his voice cracked. That single word hung in the air like a forgotten verse finally sung. I thought you were gone." She gave a broken laugh, short and wet, "And I thought you were dead." Their eyes didn't move. In the crowded terminal, now breathless, now sacred, 2 lives intersected again, beneath cracked skylights and flickering lights, framed by the notes of a waltz no one remembered until today. From the sidelines, the crowd watched. No one dared interrupt. Something about the moment felt bigger than interruption, as if time itself had made a detour through the station, and no one wanted to step out of place and make it leave again. The boy from earlier stood beside his skateboard, silent, arms crossed, but now out of awe, not attitude. Reinhold took a slow step toward her. It was like watching someone move through snow that had been untouched for decades, unsure if the ground beneath would still hold. "I looked for you," he said. "After the fire, after the hospital. No one could tell me if you made it out. They said the building collapsed too fast, that no one from the 3rd floor—" "I wasn't in the building," she interrupted. "I was late. You'd already gone inside to prep for rehearsal. I only heard the sirens." She stopped, then added, her voice low, "They told me you were gone." His hand tightened at his side. You could see the weight of 100 untaken steps written across his shoulders. "And the song?" she asked, almost afraid. "The Last Waltz of Elara? You never played it. You never finished it." "I finished it the day I lost you," he whispered. For a long moment, her tears were the only reply. Someone in the crowd, an older man in a janitor's uniform, removed his cap and lowered his head. The mother with the stroller leaned into her child and murmured, "You're watching a love story." Lena brushed a tear off her cheek with the back of her hand, then smiled, gently but full of ache. "So you became a ghost." He tilted his head. "And you became a stranger to time." That small smile turned into a sob. She reached out and touched his arm, fingertips only. "But it was enough. I heard someone once call your name," she said. "But it wasn't at a concert, it was on the news. After you vanished from the music world, they said you bought some media empire, changed your name, went silent." His expression didn't change. "I did." "Why?" He hesitated, glancing back toward the piano, as if the answer lived somewhere among those ivory teeth and broken strings. "When I lost you, music became too honest," he said. "Everything I wrote after burned my throat, so I stopped playing, I stopped speaking, I buried it under mergers, silence, and money." She looked down. "And all this time?" "All this time," he said, "I was building a world where I didn't have to hear the melody." It wasn't said bitterly. It was said with the sad acceptance of someone who once poured his soul into a violin-shaped life and let it sink into the sea. Lena stepped back, her breath catching in her chest. "I thought the song was gone forever," she said. He looked up. It was. There was a moment, long and aching, where it seemed they might say nothing else, that the weight of the years had left them too winded to climb any higher. Then a ripple of sound. The piano. Someone else had sat down. All heads turned. It was Craig, the skeptical musician who had jeered from the edge of the station earlier. Now he sat on the bench, trembling hands poised above the keys. He didn't play, not yet. Just looked at the older man with a silent question. "Play it," Reinhold said softly. Craig looked stunned. "Me? You remember it?" Craig nodded. "Barely. I caught the melody. It doesn't exist anywhere. I even tried searching for it earlier. I couldn't find a single recording." Reinhold nodded, then walked over. The crowd parted like mist as he passed. The gravity he carried wasn't celebrity. It was something far heavier. It was grief given shape, redemption wrapped in decades, and the quiet power of a soul that had made peace with its own ruin. He stood behind Craig and gently guided his hands. "Here," he said. "Start with G, then move to E minor. But don't play it clean. Let the note drag. Let it hurt." Craig obeyed, and the station filled again with the ghost of the melody. The child nearby leaned into the sound, clutching her doll like it could catch the music too. Craig stumbled. Reinhold corrected. Lena stepped forward, her eyes watching every movement with a hunger only the forgotten carry. Then Reinhold stopped Craig with a hand on his shoulder. He looked at the piano one last time, and sat back down. This time, he played it all. Not just the waltz, not just the melody. He played the memory of a night gone wrong, a building gone up in flames, a girl he loved and lost, and a world he tried to mute. He played the moments before the sirens, the echo of her laughter down stairwells, the ring of a wine glass on the windowsill, the last note he never reached before the fire came for everything. And then he played beyond it, the part he never wrote, the part he never dared, the finale, soft, sweeping, sorrowful, but not hopeless. When the final chord came, Lena stepped forward, not as an audience member, not as a relic of a forgotten past, but as a woman returned. She rested her hand on the piano, and Reinhold, without hesitation, covered it with his. The station did not clap this time. There are moments beyond applause, moments where silence is the only language that fits. The silence after the last note wasn't just absence, it was reverence. It draped the station like a thick velvet curtain, muffling breath, slowing heartbeats, and holding every soul still. For a brief moment, no one moved. Not the mother clutching her child, not the traveler with a train to catch, not the boy with the skateboard who no longer remembered why he was mocking this man minutes ago. It was as if time had stepped out of the building. Then came the voice. "Excuse me?" A breathless woman said from the edge of the crowd, pushing through with shaking hands and disbelief in her eyes. Is that him?" Reinhold turned his head slowly. He knew this moment was inevitable, like rain that had been building in the clouds all day. The woman was younger than Lena, in her 40s perhaps, with a phone trembling in her hand and earbuds dangling uselessly around her neck. Her friend tugged at her sleeve, whispering urgently, "You recognize him too?" Reinhold Stratus, the first woman said aloud, louder than intended. It's him. He disappeared 10 years ago. A small buzz stirred through the crowd like electricity through a still wire. Now people leaned in. Phones lifted. Whispers turned to quiet gasps. Some stepped forward while others instinctively stepped back, uncertain how close they should get to a man who had lived like a ghost and now played like a legend. Craig, still seated at the bench beside him, looked up in awe. "You're the one who founded Auralis Records, aren't you?" And then vanished after. Reinhold stood before the question could finish. The air shifted again. He didn't speak, just offered a small nod that confirmed what half the crowd was afraid to say aloud. Yes, he was that Reinhold Stratus, the reclusive billionaire who turned an unknown music licensing firm into an empire that powered every platform from vinyl resurrections to streaming giants. The same man who, 10 years ago, after a meteoric rise and the tragic death of his only son, vanished from the public eye. No sightings, no interviews, only rumors. That he had lost his mind, that he had become a monk, that he had gone blind, or was writing a symphony in a cave in Iceland. But none of those were true. He had gone silent, because music reminded him of what he lost. And today, in this worn, overlooked corner of the world, in a station filled with strangers and one forgotten love, he had chosen to play again. Lena took a step closer, standing at his side like the years had never split them. Her voice, when it came, was soft. "They recognize you." "I know," he replied. "Are you going to speak to them?" He paused, looking over the gathering crowd. There were no paparazzi here, no media vans, just humans, eyes wide, hands cold, hearts open. People who had, perhaps unknowingly, waited their whole lives to witness something like this. Not fame, not wealth, but honesty, raw and unpolished. "I already have," he said, and then for the first time he smiled. But it wasn't a smile of performance. It wasn't one practiced for cameras or polished for panels. It was the smile of a man who had been locked inside himself for too long and finally found the door again. The little girl in the polka dot dress stepped forward from the crowd. She couldn't have been older than 7. She tugged gently on his coat. He looked down. She held up a small notebook, its pages filled with scribbles and crayon lines. "I'm learning piano," she said, "but my teacher says I'm too slow, that I'll never be great." Reinhold knelt, not out of spectacle but instinct. He looked at her seriously, as if no one else existed. "Greatness," he said gently, "is not about speed, it's about truth. And the world needs more slow, honest music." The girl's eyes lit up. She nodded, then hugged him with the ease and trust of a child who hadn't yet learned to be cautious with her affection. Lena watched the moment unfold, a hand pressed to her heart, as if she were holding it in place. Behind them, someone clapped again, and this time others joined. Genuine, uncoached applause, rippling through the station not like thunder, but like rain on an old rooftop, familiar, rhythmic, comforting. But one person did not clap. Craig stood silently, eyes still fixed on the piano. He looked at Reinhold. "That melody, it doesn't exist anywhere. There's no sheet music, no recording, no history." "There wasn't supposed to be," Reinhold answered. "Then how?" Craig's voice caught. "How did you remember it?" Reinhold turned, gaze distant. "Because it was never written for the world. It was written for her." He looked at Lena, and 1,000 unwritten songs passed between them in that glance. "But it should exist," Craig insisted. "You can't just disappear again and take it with you." Reinhold walked back to the piano, running a hand along its battered lid. "I didn't come here to be found," he said softly. "But maybe it's time the song had a place in the world, not in the clouds, but right here, with people." He turned to Craig. "Do you have a way to record?" Craig nodded eagerly, pulling out his phone. "Yes, studio quality. I can polish the sound, rebuild the broken notes." "No," Reinhold said gently, "leave the broken notes. That's what makes it real." He sat once more, this time with Lena beside him. And as Craig positioned the microphone, Reinhold looked toward the little girl again and gave her a nod. "This one is for every slow, honest heart." Then he played. Not a performance, a gift. And as the notes spilled out once more, filling the station, people didn't just record, they listened. Really listened, with their hearts, not their devices. And this time, when the song ended, no one dared to clap. They just stood there, quietly changed. The applause never came, not this time. Because something about the music made clapping feel crude, like whistling in a cathedral. When Reinhold's fingers lifted from the keys, the silence that followed was holy, fragile, the kind of stillness you didn't dare disturb unless you were ready to weep with it. Craig let his phone fall to his side. He didn't even check if the audio saved. He just stood there, eyes glassy, as though what he'd heard had reordered something deep inside him that he hadn't realized was out of place. He looked younger somehow, less burdened by bitterness, more aware of everything he didn't yet know. His voice, when it returned, was hoarse. How did no one ever hear this before? Reinhold leaned forward and gently closed the lid over the keys. His hands lingered there for a second, and in that moment, the crowd could almost see it. What he was letting go of. Not just the song, but the silence it had lived inside for so long. "Because I wrote it the night before the world ended," he said. "And when it did, I buried it with everything else I loved." He looked over his shoulder at Lena. She wasn't crying. Not anymore. She was smiling. Not broadly, not with joy, but with something steadier, something earned. The kind of smile you wear when you thought you'd lost something forever, and suddenly, unbelievably, you're holding it in your hands again. "You never played it for anyone?" she asked. "Only in dreams," he answered. "And sometimes in nightmares." She reached out and without asking took his hand. "You should let the world hear it now." Reinhold looked around. The crowd had swelled. There were over 100 people now. Travelers who had missed their trains, strangers who had doubled back, men in suits, women in scrubs, teenagers with earbuds, elders with walking sticks, a full mosaic of lives that had been paused mid-step, mid-call, mid-thought, now gathered in a half-circle of quiet reverence. He nodded once, slowly. "Then it starts here." At that, Craig stepped forward again, urgency in his voice. "We can take it to my studio. I'll handle the mastering, the registration. This can go global in less than a day." Reinhold smiled softly. "And then what? It gets lost in an algorithm?" Craig flushed. "No, I mean, the right people would hear it." "The right people already have," Reinhold replied. There was no arrogance in the way he said it, just clarity. Lena squeezed his hand gently. "But maybe there's one more who needs to hear it." Reinhold's smile faltered. He looked away, then down, his other hand curled into a fist, resting against his thigh. Craig sensed he'd hit a nerve and instinctively backed off, but Lena didn't. She moved closer, voice quieter now. "It's time." A long silence passed between them, the kind where words were a courtesy, but pain was the real language. "My son," Reinhold finally said, his voice thin, breath catching in the middle. He never heard the finished version. He took a breath, exhaled like he'd been holding that air for years. "I played it once, just the opening phrases." He was 6, he said it made his chest feel heavy. A faint smile tugged at his mouth. He asked me if music could cry. Lena didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. "He died in a car crash the year I completed the second movement. I'd taken him to my new studio. He wanted to try the drums. I left to get us lunch. A truck ran a red light." The words hit the crowd like invisible thunder. No one moved. Reinhold looked up. "After that, I stopped. I shut the studio down, donated the instruments, fired the staff, sold the company. I couldn't bear the sound of a piano. It felt like betrayal." He ran a hand down the piano's side. "But today," he whispered, "I remembered what it's for." Craig swallowed hard. "What's that?" He looked around, voice stronger now. "To let people feel what words can't say. To tell the truth when the world's too loud to hear it." A hush deeper than before settled. Even the pigeons on the rafters had gone still, as if they too were listening. Reinhold turned to Craig. "Do you still have the recording?" Craig nodded silently and held out his phone. Reinhold took it, looked down at the screen, then walked to the center of the crowd. People instinctively made room, parting around him like ripples from a dropped stone. He held the phone up to his lips and, with one thumb, pressed the record button. Then softly, "This is Reinhold Stratus. Today, I played a song no one's heard in decades. It's called The Last Waltz of Elara. I wrote it for love, for grief, for silence, for what we carry when we think no one sees us. If it finds you, let it stay. Let it be yours too." He stopped the recording and handed the phone back to Craig. "Don't market it," he said. "Don't pitch it. Just release it, anonymously if you can." Craig nodded, visibly moved. "I will." Then, from somewhere in the crowd, a voice called out, "Play it one more time." Dozens murmured in agreement. But Reinhold shook his head gently. "No, Once was enough. He looked at the piano. Let it rest now. And then he walked away. No fanfare, no goodbye, just turned, hand in Lena's, and vanished into the station's echoing corridors. People didn't follow. They simply stood there, caught between the moment and the memory, unwilling to break the spell. Back at the piano, the little girl from earlier climbed onto the bench. She reached for a key. Pressed it. The sound wavered, uncertain. But the look on her face said everything. She wasn't trying to play the same notes. She was just trying to begin her own. The girl's finger hovered over the key for a breath longer than it should have. It was just one note, just a sound. But when it finally rang out, a high, shy C, it pierced the stillness like a whisper inside a chapel. The crowd didn't erupt. They didn't laugh. They simply watched, as if that one trembling note carried forward everything that had just been played before it. Her mother stood a few paces behind, hands clasped to her chest, eyes wide and wet. Her daughter had been too scared to touch a piano in over a year. Not after her recital meltdown. Not after her teacher gave up. And now, here she was, tiny fingers hovering again, trembling and unsure, but trying. That's what Reinhold left behind. An invitation, not an echo. She pressed another note, then two. They didn't match. They didn't make sense, but they were honest. A young man in a hoodie bent down near her and whispered, "What's your name?" She didn't stop playing. "Emily." "That was brave, Emily." The girl smiled, not because she believed him, but because it had been so long since anyone said that to her. Not far off, Craig had crouched down beside the piano, face pale, hands still gripping the phone that now carried the recording Reinhold had made. "Did that really happen?" someone beside him whispered. "Was that him?" Craig nodded slowly. It was him, all of him. He stood, moved through the dispersing crowd, and stared at the piano once more. The lid was still closed, the seat empty, but the music, it lingered. Not just in the minds of those who had heard it, but in something deeper, like it had been sewn into the bricks, the rails, the cold station air itself. The old woman, Lena, was gone now too. Disappeared with Reinhold into the slow hum of the city, hand in hand like some myth unspooled into life. But the people hadn't moved on. They lingered. Dozens still stood, not because they were waiting for something else, but because they didn't know how to return to who they were before. That's what great music does. It doesn't finish. It rewrites. A middle-aged man in a business suit approached Craig and said, "I don't know who you are, but please, don't let that recording vanish." Craig looked down at his phone again. A red dot blinked. The recording had saved. He didn't know what he was holding exactly, but his gut told him it was no ordinary audio file. It felt like a door, like a relic, like the sound of someone coming back from the dead. "I won't," he promised, voice barely above a murmur. "I'll make sure it reaches people who need it." He didn't know it yet, but within 48 hours, that promise would echo across the globe. But for now, it was enough. The little girl finished her third broken chord and looked up at her mother, uncertain. Her mother wiped her eyes and whispered, "It's beautiful." "No, it's not," the girl said shyly. Her mother bent down. "Then it's becoming." And that too was enough. Across the plaza, a man who'd taken the long way home every evening without knowing why found himself sitting on a bench longer than usual, staring at the keys. He'd lost his wife to cancer 3 years earlier. She used to play waltzes in their kitchen on Sunday afternoons, barefoot, always with her eyes closed. He never learned the name of the songs, but he remembered the way they made him feel. Like they were dancing through the fog together. He hadn't listened to music since her funeral. But now, he closed his eyes and let the sound return. It didn't hurt this time. Near him, a teenager slowly unpacked a sketchpad and began drawing. Not the piano, but the man who had played it. Not in detail, but in spirit. The bent posture, the fluttering hands, the storm inside him barely contained. His fingers moved fast, almost frantically, as afraid the memory might dissolve if he didn't capture it now. A vendor shut down his food cart without making a sale. He simply looked at the gathering and whispered, "You'll never see something like this again." The vendor beside him replied, "I think we will. Just not here." Far beyond the station, in a quiet neighborhood with ivy-choked walls and iron lampposts, Lena and Reinhold walked hand in hand beneath the orange hue of the streetlights. They hadn't spoken since leaving the station. There was no need. For years, Reinhold had walked through cities as a stranger, And now, for the first time in a decade, he felt like a man returning home, not to a house or a company, but to himself. "You know," Lena said softly, "when the fire happened, when I thought you were gone, I dreamed of you every night for months, but you never spoke in those dreams." He looked over at her, face full of shadow and gentleness. "I was screaming in mine." They paused at the gate of an old apartment building covered in ivy, the kind of place time forgot, where every brick had a story and the windows flickered warm with yellow light. "This is me," Lena said. "I know." She smiled again, same as before, aged, sorrowed, and luminous. He hesitated. "I don't know if I should. You don't have to play another song tonight," she said. "But maybe just stay until the silence doesn't scare you anymore." And so he did. Upstairs, the window stayed lit long into the night. Back at the station, Craig walked alone to a quiet corner, plugged in headphones and pressed play. The song filled his ears. It wasn't just a melody, it was a map, a message, a benediction. Somewhere between the notes, he heard his own longing, his own father, who never said he was proud, his own music, trapped under layers of insecurity and approval chasing. Tears rolled down his cheeks. And as the crowd slowly faded one by one, no one saw Reinhold Stratus again that night. But they didn't need to, because that song, those aching, beautiful notes, had already taken root. Not in radios, not in charts, but in hearts. And that was where it belonged all along. By morning, the city had returned to its usual rhythm. Horns in impatient syncopation, coffee shops humming with pre-meeting chatter, commuters rushing through cold glass doors like ants through tunnels. The world, it seemed, had moved on. But the train station had not. A quiet hush still wrapped itself around the piano like a veil. People passed it more slowly than usual. Some lingered. A few sat nearby, not speaking, as if in mourning for something they didn't entirely understand. A bouquet of wildflowers, faded and slightly wilted, had been placed beside the bench. No note, just the gesture. And above it, on a small cardboard sign taped gently to the frame, someone had written, "Let the music sit, it's still breathing." Craig returned just after sunrise, red-eyed and unshaven, with 2 copies of the audio file on encrypted flash drives in his coat pocket. He hadn't slept, not since Reinhold and Lena disappeared into the night. The recording had kept him awake. Not just the sound of it, but the ache it unlocked in him. He hadn't told anyone what the song did to him yet. Not his sister. Not the old friend who used to play drums in their band before life took them separate ways. Not even the engineer he texted in the middle of the night with trembling fingers. He couldn't explain it. He didn't want to cheapen it with rushed language. But deep in his chest, he knew something had shifted. Reinhold Stratus hadn't just returned. He had detonated something beautiful in the middle of an ordinary world, and Craig had no idea how to clean up the aftermath. The old piano still sat there, solemn and waiting. Someone had wiped it down, perhaps as a quiet act of reverence. A girl stood nearby, drawing it on a sketchpad, her strokes slow and careful, as if trying to protect the memory by making it permanent. Craig didn't interrupt. He just sat nearby and listened to the silence, because it wasn't empty. It was filled with echoes. Later that morning, the first email arrived. It came from an anonymous address, with only a subject line. "Was this you?" Attached was a video. The moment Reinhold played the final refrain, recorded from someone's shaky phone, filmed from a wide angle, blurring the detail but somehow capturing the soul. The sound was slightly off, but even through distortion, the ache in the melody was unmistakable. Craig clicked play again, and again. Each time, he felt something drop deeper inside him. He wasn't ready to answer the email. Not yet. By noon, 5 more came in. By 3 p.m., the video had 37,000 views on an obscure upload account. By midnight, it had 1 million. People weren't just sharing it, they were writing stories with it. One caption read, "I played this while writing a letter to my father. He died when I was 12. Today, I forgave him." Another said, "I'm in a hospital waiting room. My mother is going into surgery. This calmed me." I think he would have wanted it that way. The comments didn't ask for the artist's name. They didn't beg for a studio version. They didn't want credits or production quality. They just said things like, "This healed something I didn't know was broken. This feels like a song written by the stars. This is what goodbye should sound like." And so the waltz moved, without branding, without a face, like a secret passed from heart to heart, like a prayer the world forgot how to say out loud. Craig watched it unfold in awe. He didn't touch the file. He didn't re-edit it. He didn't try to monetize it, though people told him he was crazy not to. A record label executive even called and said, "Whoever owns that file owns the future." Craig just replied, "That's the thing. No one owns it. It owns us." And that's when he realized what Reinhold had done. He hadn't just played a song. He had let something go, set it free. And now the world was catching it mid-flight, letting it land softly where it was needed. By the second night, a boy in Japan uploaded a violin cover. By the third, a gospel choir in New Orleans recorded an a cappella version under a bridge, with candles glowing all around them. By the fourth, a deaf girl in Argentina shared a sign language interpretation. She'd never heard the original notes. She said she learned it by watching people's faces as they listened. "I felt it in their eyebrows," she typed in her caption, "in their breathing, in the space between their blinks." By the end of the week, it was everywhere. And still, no one knew Reinhold's name. He had asked for no credit. And somehow, the world honored it. But not everyone could keep the secret. One evening, after thousands had flooded forums asking who created the Last Waltz of Elara, a woman stepped forward on a podcast. Her voice was gentle, cautious. "I won't give his name," she said, "because I don't think it matters. What matters is that he came back from silence, and he gave the silence a gift before he left again." Her name was Lena. She didn't explain their story. She didn't tell them about the fire or the boy who once asked if music could cry. She only said one thing: he played for someone once, and then the world overheard. And that was enough. A journalist tried to track him down. So did a television crew. Even a music historian who had once studied Stratus's rare compositions wrote an entire article speculating on the identity. But the people didn't care. They didn't want the myth shattered. They just wanted the melody to remain untouched. So it did. At the station, someone donated a new bench for the piano. A plaque was added beneath it with no name, only a sentence. He played the silence into something beautiful. Children came to touch the keys. Strangers sat nearby just to read. Couples passed with arms entwined, sometimes humming the waltz without realizing it. And every once in a while, someone would play it again. Not perfectly, but honestly. And that, Reinhold would have said, was more than enough. Rain fell like memory that evening, soft, persistent, and full of unspoken things. The city shimmered under its silver sheen, reflecting headlights and sidewalk lanterns in fractured puddles. In a quiet neighborhood tucked away from the hurried pulse of downtown, Lena opened her window just enough to let the air in. It smelled like spring and wet concrete and something older, like the scent of a memory left too long unopened. She sat on the edge of her bed, knees tucked beneath her robe, a cup of tea cooling in her hands. Across from her, Reinhold sat in the only chair in the room, spine straight, face turned toward the rain-streaked glass. He hadn't spoken much since the station, not from withdrawal, but from stillness. Like something in him had finally come to rest, and now he didn't want to risk waking it too soon. Lena studied him quietly. It had been decades of loss, of unanswered questions, of fading what-ifs. But tonight, she didn't see the man the world once obsessed over. She didn't see the mogul or the recluse, or even the myth. She saw the boy who once played her lullabies on a piano missing 3 keys. The one who, years ago, promised to write her a waltz that could never be forgotten. And he had, just not in time. But still, in time enough. She finally broke the silence. "Do you regret it?" He turned his eyes toward her. "Which part?" Coming back, his lips pressed together, unreadable for a moment. Then he said, "No, but I do regret not coming sooner." Outside, thunder murmured in the distance. The kind that didn't scare you, just reminded you the sky still had things to say. Lena reached over and placed her hand gently atop his. "I never stopped waiting." He swallowed hard. His voice nearly cracked when he replied, "That's what breaks me the most." But she shook her head, soft and certain. "Then don't let it." They sat there like that for a while, fingers laced, the silence between them no longer heavy, just deep, like a well with light at the bottom. Eventually, she rose and walked to a small cabinet in the corner. From it, she pulled out an old dusty box with a ribbon so faded it had turned from blue to gray. She placed it in his lap. He stared at it, then looked up, startled. You kept this?" "I couldn't throw it away," she said, "even when I thought you died, even when it hurt to touch." He untied the ribbon slowly, reverently, as if it might collapse in his hands. Inside, resting on a bed of folded letters and old newspaper clippings, was a cassette tape. He blinked. "I thought this was lost. I found it after the fire," she said, "in the corner of the rehearsal room, half burned but still whole. I kept it hidden, thinking one day, maybe." His hands shook as he picked it up. He turned it over, reading the label written in his own scrawl. "Elara, draft I. Don't listen until finished." She smiled gently, but it was already enough. He looked at her, the weight of years flooding his eyes. Would you want to hear it again?" "I've been waiting," she said. So he rose, walked slowly to the antique tape deck she still kept for sentimental reasons, and slid the cassette inside. The machine whirred, clicked, then hummed to life. And then, there it was, the early draft, raw, imperfect, tender. Her melody still forming, some keys out of place, a stumble in the middle, a pause where he had run out of confidence, not inspiration, but still, unmistakably hers. They sat on the floor as it played, no talking, just listening. When it ended, she leaned her head on his shoulder. "You know," she said, "it wasn't the melody that stayed with me all these years. It was the silence that followed." He turned slightly, brow furrowed. She smiled. "The way it made me feel like something had been said, even after the sound stopped. That's when I knew you really loved me." He closed his eyes, pressed his lips to her forehead, and whispered, "I never stopped." Later that night, long after the rain faded and the city's breath slowed, Reinhold stood alone at the piano in Lena's living room. It was small, slightly out of tune and missing a pedal, but it held her fingerprints, her childhood, her laughter. He could feel it beneath his palms. He didn't play Elara this time. He played something new, a quiet melody, unnamed, still forming, still afraid, but beautiful. In that trembling way a bird looks when it first tests the air. Lena watched from the hallway, arms wrapped around herself, eyes wide and wet. And as he played, the night opened itself to the sound. No one recorded it. No one shared it. No one tried to own it. It existed for her and for him. And for the moment, they never thought they'd live to share. The next morning, sunlight spilled through Lena's lace curtains, casting golden patterns across the wooden floor like a quiet blessing. Outside, the world had already begun to stir. Bikes rolled over cobblestones, dogs barked from balconies, and the first wave of footsteps echoed down the narrow sidewalk. But inside her apartment, time had slowed again. Reinhold stood by the window, his hands cradling a chipped porcelain mug she'd had since the 70s. His eyes traced the sky, the rooftops, the branches of a blooming dogwood tree stretching itself toward the day. He hadn't slept much, but his exhaustion didn't feel heavy. It felt earned, like a kind of peace had found its way back into the hollow places. Behind him, Lena stirred. Barefoot, robe cinched at the waist, hair still soft with sleep. She moved without words, like she'd done this every morning for years. "You always stood by the window like that," she said quietly, her voice still husky from sleep. "Even back then." He turned, smiling faintly, still trying to figure out what I missed. "You didn't miss it," she said, walking toward him. "You just paused it, and now it's playing again." She pressed her lips to his shoulder, rested her forehead there, and for a long while they simply existed, without expectation, without fear. As if the past had made its peace and the future wasn't asking for anything yet. The quiet was broken by a knock. Reinhold straightened, instinct flaring in his chest. It had been so long since people showed up without warning, without appointment, without agenda. But Lena, calm as ever, walked to the door and opened it. It was a girl, 16, maybe 17, with dark curls tied back in a low bun and eyes too wide for someone that young. She clutched a folded piece of sheet music in her hands, fingers trembling around the edges. "Sorry," she said, voice quivering. I didn't know who else to ask." Lena smiled warmly. "You're not lost, are you?" "No, I'm here for him." Her gaze flicked over Lena's shoulder to Reinhold. He stepped forward, puzzled. "Do I know you?" The girl blushed, then shook her head quickly. "No, I was at the station. I heard the waltz. I've never felt something like that before. I haven't been able to sleep." Reinhold softened. "What's your name?" "Ava." "And what do you have there, Ava?" She swallowed. "I tried to write what I remembered. I play by ear. I don't I'm not very good at reading or writing music, but I needed to hold it somehow, the way it made me feel. She extended the paper. Reinhold took it, carefully unfolding the wrinkled lines, his eyes scanning the handwritten notes and chords. It was messy, fragmented. Some measures were incorrect, others startlingly accurate. And yet, it was there. The emotion, the shape, the ghost of the waltz, reinterpreted through the ears of someone young and wide open to feeling. He looked at her, heart full. You captured something real. Ava's eyes filled with tears. You're not angry? He shook his head. I'm grateful. She exhaled, relief washing over her like rain. Everyone at school's been talking about it, the waltz, but no one knows who played it. Some think it was AI, others think it was a ghost, he chuckled. Maybe both. Ava took a hesitant step closer. I know you probably want to stay anonymous, but would you come to my school? Just once? We have a recital next week. It's nothing fancy, a community thing, a few teachers, some parents. But it would mean everything. Reinhold's first instinct was to decline. He'd given the world a piece of his soul already. He'd poured it out, note by note, in a dusty train station under flickering lights and doubtful eyes. That was supposed to be enough. But as he looked at her, nervous, hopeful, scared of being too much and not enough all at once, he remembered something. He had once been her, a boy with trembling hands and a psalm too big to carry alone. He looked at Lena, who gave him a nod. Quiet approval. She already knew his answer. He turned back to Ava. I'll come, he said, but I'm not there to perform. She tilted her head. Then why? To listen. Her face broke into a smile so wide it trembled at the edges. I'll tell Mr. Klein. He won't believe it. Reinhold held her gaze. Tell him not to believe it, just to hear it. She nodded, clutched the sheet music to her chest, and ran down the steps 2 at a time. When she was gone, Reinhold stepped back inside and sat at Lena's piano. He didn't open it. He just sat there, hands folded in his lap, feeling the weight of the bench, the shape of the room, the space where music had once filled the walls. Lena joined him, draping an arm around his shoulders. You're not finished, are you? He shook his head. I don't think I was ever supposed to be. That evening, they arrived at the community center 15 minutes before the recital. The chairs were plastic and mismatched. The stage was barely a foot above the floor. The backdrop was made of hand-painted cardboard cutouts, music notes, stars, clumsy treble clefs, but it was perfect. Ava spotted him from across the room and ran up, beaming. You came. I said I would. She handed him a printed program. His name wasn't on it. He liked that. The room filled slowly. Parents murmured. Children tuned violins, pounded anxious scales on digital keyboards, whispered lyrics to themselves under their breath. And then the recital began. A boy played Chopin with sweaty palms and determination. A girl sang an off-key version of Hallelujah that made 2 mothers cry anyway. A trio of 3rd graders forgot their lyrics halfway through a folk tune and started giggling uncontrollably. And Reinhold listened, really listened. He clapped after each piece, smiled, nodded, gave every child his full attention. Then Ava stood. She didn't announce her piece. She just walked to the keyboard, set the crumpled sheet music down, took a long breath, and began to play. Her version of the Last Waltz of Elara was slower, softer, uncertain in places, but it was hers. And when she reached the final chord, something unexpected happened. Reinhold stood and walked to the second keyboard beside her. He didn't ask. He just joined her. And together, they played the closing refrain, harmony and melody intertwining, old and young meeting at the bridge of sound. The room was silent, and when they finished, no one clapped right away. They just sat there, caught between disbelief and beauty, until one child, no older than 6, whispered, "That sounded like saying goodbye and hello." Reinhold looked at Ava and smiled. It did. The recital ended the way most quiet miracles do, not with fanfare, but with a hush that no one dared to break. Parents wiped their eyes without knowing why. Children stood a little taller, not because of praise, but because they'd seen something rare. A man who had everything, sitting beside a girl who had nothing to prove, making music that didn't ask for applause. Reinhold stayed until the last note, the last bow, the last hug between child and parent. When the chairs scraped across the linoleum and the janitor flicked the lights in warning, he finally rose from the bench. Ava followed him to the exit, her steps lighter than they'd been in months. You really meant it, she said. You didn't come to perform. He paused, looking down at her. I told you, I came to listen. She hesitated before asking, but why? Why me? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he bent down slightly so they were eye level. Because you remembered, and because you felt something and you didn't try to make it perfect. You just tried to carry it. That's the difference between musicians and messengers. You're a messenger, Ava. Her eyes shimmered. So are you. He straightened slowly, giving her a gentle smile. Not anymore. I'm passing it on. Outside, Lena was waiting beneath a flickering street lamp, her hands tucked into the pockets of her coat, a look on her face like she'd been watching a story unfold that only she could understand. He joined her, and they walked in silence for a while, their shadows trailing behind them, long and fragile. What did you see in her? Lena finally asked. Reinhold thought carefully. I saw someone who hadn't been taught to fear the silence yet. Lena nodded slowly. I remember being that girl once. So do I, he said, gently squeezing her hand. They didn't go straight home. Instead, Reinhold guided her down a quiet street, past shuttered bakeries and closed bookstores, until they reached a gate covered in ivy. I haven't been here in years, he said. Lena looked up at the plaque by the entrance. The Whitmore Conservatory of Music. Her breath caught. You taught here, he nodded. Before the fame, before the world got noisy. They stood in front of it for a moment, the locked gate between them and everything they'd once been. I used to imagine I'd walk through these doors again one day, he said, not as a name, not as a ghost, just as someone with something left to offer. You still do, she said. No, he replied. Not here, not in the old way, but maybe somewhere new. As if on cue, his phone buzzed in his coat pocket. He hesitated before checking it. He hadn't looked at it all day, and the sudden vibration felt like the old world tugging at his sleeve. The message was from Craig. We need to talk. Something's happening. Check the link. He clicked the link. A video began to play. Not from the station, not the original recording. It was a compilation. Dozens of children from cities and villages all over the world playing the Last Waltz of Elara. Some on battered keyboards, some on violins with missing strings. Some singing it with only their voices, others humming along with makeshift harmonies. It had been stitched together beautifully, each child picking up the phrase where the last left off, the music threading through languages, continents, and cultures like it was born of the sky. The video ended with a still frame of a handwritten message, to the man who let the world remember what it means to feel. Reinhold stared at it for a long time. Then he whispered, more to himself than anyone. I didn't release it. Lena's eyes softened. But you let it go. They stood beneath the stars, the city whispering around them, the echo of a song traveling across the globe like a flock of birds set free. I thought I needed silence, he said, but maybe I just needed to be heard. You were, she said. You still are. They turned back toward home. The walk was quiet, but not empty. The next morning, Reinhold received a letter. Not a message, not an email. A letter, handwritten, sealed, delivered by courier. It came from a woman named Dr. Haidt, Amelia Hargrove, the director of a music therapy foundation in Vermont. She had seen the video. He unfolded the pages, his eyes scanning the careful script. There are children in our program, abuse survivors, cancer patients, grieving foster youth, who don't speak. Not to counselors, not to family, not to anyone. But yesterday, for the first time in weeks, one of them sat at the piano and played something. He had never touched an instrument before. It was your waltz. He played it badly, but he played it. And when he finished, he looked up and said, I think this song knows how I feel. At the end of the letter was a simple invitation. If you ever wish to teach again, not theory, not technique, but something deeper, our door is open. Reinhold folded the letter slowly, his hands trembling. He looked out the window, where Lena stood in the garden, trimming her lavender bushes. He joined her. She glanced up, brushing dirt from her gloves. Something on your mind? He handed her the letter. She read it in silence, then looked at him with a knowing smile. You're thinking about it, she said. I'm thinking, he admitted, that maybe music isn't something we retire from. Maybe we just change the audience. She reached up and cupped his cheek. You don't owe the world a masterpiece. You gave them your heart. That was enough. He leaned in, pressing his forehead to hers. What if I have one more song left? Her voice was a whisper against his lips. Then play it, but only if it's for you this time. And in the stillness that followed, he knew he would. Not because the world was asking, but because something inside him had begun again. Not from fame, not from loss, but from love. It was a chapel made of pine and quiet. The walls inside the Vermont retreat weren't adorned with plaques or portraits, but with soft light and shelves lined with small instruments, hand drums, ukuleles, dulcimers, wind chimes. No signs, no slogans, just stillness, as if the building itself respected the weight carried by the children who walked its hallways. Reinhold stood just inside the main room, his hands folded in front of him, his eyes taking in every detail. There were no rows of desks, no conductors' stands, just floor cushions arranged in a gentle spiral, each one occupied by a child of different size, shape, and history. Most sat with their heads down, their bodies curled inward. Some clutched instruments like anchors. Others held nothing at all, except the silence around them. A boy near the center, small, red-haired, with one sock rolled to his ankle, rocked gently in place, eyes trained on his knees. Reinhold didn't speak. He didn't need to. He walked to the weathered baby grand in the corner, painted white, smudged with hundreds of fingerprints chipped from years of being loved. It wasn't in tune. A few notes were stubborn. The middle G hissed like breath over gravel. He sat, not to impress, not to teach, but to offer. He rested his fingers lightly on the keys. Then he began. Not with the Last Waltz of Elara, but something softer, something barely formed. A melody made not of notes but of hesitation and patience and space. It was the kind of music that leaned toward the listener instead of pulling them in, the kind that asked for nothing except presence. One child looked up, then another, and another. The red-haired boy leaned forward, blinking. A girl with a hearing aid tapped her hand against her chest, following the rhythm by feel. Still, Reinhold didn't speak. Instead, he opened the melody like a window, slowly and gently, letting the light fall across the faces in front of him. Letting them step into it, if they chose. Letting them decide when the silence would end. He played for 10 minutes, maybe 20. No one kept track. And when the final note lingered, dissolving into the hum of the old air vent overhead, he let it fade without trying to save it. Then he looked at them, and he said the first words he'd spoken that day. You don't have to be perfect here, you just have to be honest. No one clapped, no one cheered. But a boy in the back, a boy who hadn't spoken since his mother's funeral, who'd arrived 2 weeks ago clutching a backpack and nothing else, lifted a recorder to his lips and played a single note. It was off key. It cracked halfway through. But it was everything. And Reinhold nodded slowly, as if to say, I hear you. That was how it began. He returned every week, never as Mr. Stratus. Just Reinhold. Sometimes he brought sheet music. Sometimes only his hands. Sometimes he said nothing and let the children lead. Sometimes he played lullabies so slow they sounded like they were remembering themselves. He taught them how to listen, to the rests, to the breath between notes, to the sound of their own trembling. He told them music wasn't about filling silence, but about understanding it. The children bloomed, not all at once, not like flowers, but like stars, one by one. And still, he refused credit. He declined interviews, declined the magazine features and the award nominations and the countless legacy offers. He turned them all down with a gentle smile, a soft shake of his head. I already gave the world my silence, he once told Lena. Now I'm giving my sound to the ones who were never handed theirs. At the station back home, the old public piano remained in its corner. But now, it wore a fresh coat of black lacquer, the keys restored, a small bouquet placed every Friday morning by someone anonymous. A camera had been installed above it, not for security, but for wonder. People still came, tourists, musicians, teenagers on field trips, elders on memory walks. Some played, some wept, some just sat near it, needing the reminder that beauty didn't always need to be loud or famous. One summer afternoon, Ava returned with her school group. She sat at the bench again, taller now, bolder. She played the full waltz from memory, eyes closed. A crowd gathered, of course, but no one knew she had once played it beside the man who gave it life. And she never told them, because it wasn't about her. And it wasn't about him, it was about the music. Months later, Lena and Reinhold sat on their porch, hands intertwined, as autumn began to rust the trees. He turned to her suddenly, a twinkle in his eyes. I want to write again. She smiled. Good, you never stopped. He paused, watching the leaves fall. but not alone. This time I want to write it with them, the children, every note, every silence, together. She nodded, understanding in full. A new waltz? No, he said, pressing her hand to his chest. A beginning. And so the man who once vanished to escape his grief became a lighthouse for those lost in it, not by being loud, but by being present, by showing that silence, when honored, could sing louder than any orchestra. And somewhere across the world, in bedrooms and classrooms, in train stations and therapy circles, in lonely hearts and trembling fingers, the Last Waltz of Elara lived on. Not as a piece of music, but as a feeling, a bridge, a beginning. A song that never truly ended, because it had become part of the people who dared to hear it. And once something like that lives inside you, you never stop listening. To anyone who has ever buried their voice beneath grief or shame, let this story remind you. It's never too late to be heard. Reinhold Stratus didn't return to the world to reclaim his fame. He returned to reclaim his heart. In a forgotten train station, he sat at a broken piano, not to impress, but to remember. What followed wasn't just a melody. It was a resurrection. A song no one had heard in decades gave a voice to the voiceless. Healing, not through perfection, but through vulnerability. This story isn't just about music. It's about courage. The courage to sit beside your pain, to play through your silence, and to pass the melody on. Whether you're a child just learning your first notes or someone who walked away from your instrument years ago, remember, your broken song still matters. The world doesn't need your perfection. It needs your truth. Because sometimes, one honest note can become the anthem of 1,000 hearts. So play, speak, live. And when the moment comes to let go, may your silence echo with love.